For many years, Wilfred Martin collected samples of alternative medicines, homeopathic remedies, and herbal pills. Most of them he never used, never even tried because he was afraid of them. But he kept the lot in a cupboard in a bathroom in his house in Falcon Mews, Maida Vale. And when he died, they went, along with the house and its contents, to his son, Carl. It was junk. Harmless at best, possibly dangerous, all those bottles and jars and sachets just taking up room. But Carl didn't throw it out because he couldn't be bothered. He had other things to do. If he had known how it, or one particular item among all the rest, would change his life, transform it, ruin it, he would have emptied the lot into a plastic bag, carried the bag down the road, and dumped it in the big rubbish bin. For a while, he thought no more about the contents of his bathroom cupboard. He was occupied with his girlfriend Nicola, his novel Death's Door, which had just been published, and with letting the top floor of his house. He had no need of those 2 rooms plus kitchen and bathroom, and great need of the rent. Excited though he was about the publication of his first book, he was not so naive at 23 as to suppose he could live by writing alone. Rents in central London had reached a peak, and Falcon Mews, a crescent looping out of Sutherland Avenue to Castellane Road in Maida Vale, was highly desirable and much sought after. So he placed an advertisement in the Paddington Express, offering accommodation, and next morning 20 prospective tenants presented themselves on his doorstep. Why he chose the first applicant, Dermot McKinnon, he never knew. Perhaps it was because he didn't want to interview dozens of people. It was a decision he was bitterly to regret. But not at the beginning. The only drawback Dermot seemed to have was his appearance, his uneven yellow teeth, for instance, his extreme thinness and round shoulders. But you don't decide against a tenant because his looks are unprepossessing, Carl told himself. And no doubt the man could pay the rent. Dermot had a job at the Sutherland Pet Clinic in the next street and produced a reference from the chief veterinarian there. Carl asked him to pay each month's rent at the end of the previous month. And perhaps the first mistake he made was to request that it be paid not by transfer into his bank account, but in notes or a cheque in an envelope left at Carl's door. Carl realised that these days this was unusual, but he wanted to see the rent come in, take it in his hand. Dermot put up no objection. Carl had already begun work on a second novel, having been encouraged by his agent Susanna Griggs to get on with it. He didn't expect an advance payment until he'd finished it, and Susanna and his editor had read and accepted it. There was no payment promised on paperback publication of Death's Door, as no one expected it to go into paperback. Still, what with being both a published author with good prospects and a landlord receiving rent, Carl felt rich. Dermot had to enter Carl's house by the front door and go up 2 flights of stairs to get to his flat, but he made no noise and, as he put it, kept himself to himself. Carl had already noticed his tenant was a master of the cliché, and for a while everything seemed fine, the rent paid promptly in £20 notes in an envelope on the last day of the month. Carl was having a coffee with his friend Stacey Warren. They had met at school, then gone to university together, where Carl had read philosophy and Stacey had taken a drama course. It was while she was still at university that her parents had been killed in a car crash, and Stacey inherited quite a lot of money, enough to buy herself a flat in Primrose Hill. Stacey wanted to act, and because of her beautiful face and slender figure, was given a significant part in a TV sitcom called Station Road. Her face became known to the public overnight, while her slenderness was lost in a few months. "I've put on a stone," she said to Carl across the table in their local Café Rouge. "What am I going to do?" Other customers were giving her not very surreptitious glances. "They all know who I am. They're all thinking I'm getting fat. What's going to happen to me?" Carl, who was very thin, had no idea how much he weighed and didn't care. "You'll have to go on a diet, I suppose." "David and I have split up. I'm finding that very hard to take. Have I got to starve myself too?" "I don't know anything about diets, Stacey. You don't need to starve, do you?" "I'd rather take one of those magic diet pills that get advertised online. Do you know anything about them?" "Why would I?" said Carl. "Not my kind of thing." Walking home, Carl wondered if there were any slimming medications among his father's stash of pills and potions, as he had come to think of them. The house was silent when he got in. Carl went upstairs and saw that the bathroom door was open. Dermot had his own bathroom in his flat on the top floor, so had no reason to use this one. Probably he'd forgotten to close the door himself, Carl thought, as he went into the bathroom, shutting the door behind him. Wilfred's pills and potions were in a cupboard divided into 5 sections on the left-hand side of the wash basin. A lot of the products, he saw, taking small jars out at random, claimed to treat heart problems and safeguard against heart failure, yet his father had had 2 heart attacks and died after the second one. No, there was nothing here that would encourage weight loss, Carl told himself. Best throw it all out, make a clean sweep. But what was that in a large plastic zip-up bag in the second section from the top? Yellow capsules, a great many of them, labelled DNP. The foolproof way to avoid weight gain, promised the label. Behind the bag of capsules was a box full of sachets also containing DNP, but in powder-to-liquid form. Taking the plastic bag out, he noted that further down, the label advised using with care and not to exceed the stated dose, etc., etc., the usual small print. But even paracetamol containers said that. He left the bag of capsules where it was and went downstairs to look up DNP on the computer. But before he got there, the front doorbell rang, and he remembered that Nicola, beautiful, clever, sweet Nicola, was coming to spend the rest of the day and the night with him. He went to let her in, telling himself he must give her a key. He wanted her as a more permanent part of his life. With Nicola, his new novel, and a reliable tenant, life was good. For the time being, he forgot all about the slimming pills. It was the 2nd of May when the next rent payment arrived. They encountered each other in the hallway, Carl leaving the house to do some food shopping and Dermot coming in at 5:30 from the pet clinic. "I've got something for you," said Dermot, handing over an envelope. Carl thought it strange that Dermot should have carried that envelope containing £1,200 about with him all day, but still it wasn't important. He'd got his money. He wouldn't have to break into his very meagre and dwindling savings in order to go on a week's holiday with Nicola. They would only be going to Cornwall, not abroad anywhere, but he was looking forward to their stay in Foy. He and Nicola went with the couple who'd introduced them, and who were still special friends, partly for that reason. They had a good time, and by the time they got back to Paddington Station, Carl had asked Nicola to come to Falcon Mews. "I mean, to live with me," he said. "Permanently." He felt good about Nicola. They cared about the same things, books, music, the outdoors. She loved that he was a writer. He loved her. She moved in 3 days later. The day before Nicola moved in, Stacey came round. She and Carl planned to go out to eat at a nearby restaurant. Carl went upstairs to fetch himself an antihistamine pill for his hay fever. He left the bathroom door ajar. Stacey followed him in. She was one of those people who, when someone told her of a mild illness or problem, always claimed to suffer from the same complaint. "Funny you should say that, because I've got hay fever too." He opened the cabinet and found the antihistamines on the top shelf. Stacey was standing behind him, telling him about her symptoms and peering over his shoulder. "Where did all this stuff come from?" she asked. "Do you use it?" "It was my dad's. I sort of inherited it, when I got the house and the furniture and everything." He reached into the cabinet and brought out the package with the yellow capsules. "This is supposed to make you lose weight. I expect he got it online." She took the package from his hand and looked at it. "DNP," she said. "Dinitrophenol. 100 capsules." Then she read the instructions and looked at the price marked on the package. £100. "I could order some online," she said. "But, well, you've already got these. Would you sell me 50? Sell them? Carl knew he should just give them to her, but the hotel he and Nicola had stayed in Foy had been pricey, and the holiday, though the costs had been shared with Nicola, far more expensive than he'd expected. £50 for these pills wasn't all that much, but it would be a help. And Stacey could afford it. Well, she certainly could if she lost that weight and kept her sitcom job. "OK," he said, as he counted 50 pills out into a tooth mug and handed her the packet with the 50 remaining in it. He went downstairs, realising as he did so that Dermot was closing the front door on his way out. Could he have heard his conversation with Stacey as he came down the stairs? Perhaps. But what did it matter if he had? By now Stacey had finished her makeup and joined him. They were going up the road to Rowell's in Clifton Road. Outside on the pavement, she handed over the £50. Carl had taken to going out in the late morning, while Nicola was at work, and picking up a copy of the Evening Standard. He chose the Standard rather than any other daily paper, because it was free. He stared at today's front page. There, in full colour, was a 3-column photograph of Stacey. She looked beautiful, not smiling, but in a soulful pose. Described as 24 years old, with her face familiar from her starring role in Station Road. She had been found dead in her Primrose Hill flat by a friend who had a key. Police said foul play was not suspected. It couldn't be. But it must be. Carl broke into a sweat. He sat down in front of the computer and touched the tiny switch with its blue light. He had meant to try to get back into his novel, but instead he went to the internet, telling himself he'd never checked on those yellow capsules he had sold Stacey. The little arrow hovered over Google. He typed. Carl had never attended an inquest, and had no intention of going to this one. He thought about it all the time, though unwillingly, because he would prefer to forget it and dismiss the whole Stacey business from his mind. Dermot tapped on the living room door on the 1st of June, the day after rent payment day, handed over his money and said he was on his way to the Stacey Warren inquest. He expected he'd see Carl there, he said. Carl thought quickly. His nerves wouldn't stand the idea of Dermot hearing all the evidence and then coming back here and telling him in detail what had happened. He wanted to ask why Dermot was going. Carl wanted to tell him that Stacey and her death weren't his business, but he had no reason to be rude to Dermot, especially as the month's rent had come on time. "You mustn't think," Dermot said after Carl had told him he wouldn't be going, "that I'm taking time off work for this. It happens to coincide with my midday break." He smiled, showing the yellowish teeth. "A piece of luck." Halfway down the path he turned, said, "I'll look in on the way back, tell you what happened." He returned several hours later, settled down on the sofa, and described the evidence of the doctor and the biochemist in detail. Dinitrophenol capsules had been lying all over Stacey's bedroom floor, and the same substance was partially digested in her stomach and intestines. The doctor was unable to say if the dose she'd recently swallowed was her first or the latest of many. Dinitrophenol, or DNP, was known to bring about weight loss, but only if the dose was great enough. Its side effects might be skin lesions, cataracts, damage to the heart, and, here he paused, death. The coroner asked a police officer who'd been present at the medical examination where this substance could be obtained, and was told it could be bought on the internet. The coroner asked the police officer if it wasn't against the law, said Dermot. But he said it wasn't, and then he added, not yet. If I remember rightly, there was some of that DNP stuff that Stacey Warren took among your dad's medicaments. An odd word, Carl thought, medicaments. Was there? He said. Perhaps you didn't know what it was. I didn't, said Carl. He wanted to tell Dermot that he had some nerve snooping about. If you've still got it, you ought to throw it away, you know. I expect there'll be a big story in the papers tomorrow. There was indeed a big story the next day. It was on the front page of the Daily Mail, with a glamour photo of Stacey and a picture underneath of yellow capsules in a glass jar, labelled DNP. Carl read the story as he walked along. One of the things it said was that as a result of Stacey's death from DNP poisoning, dinitrophenol would soon be banned. You shouldn't believe stuff you read in the paper, Carl said to himself, and from the stare a passing woman gave him, he realised he'd said it aloud. Carl decided that now was the time to tell Nicola about Stacey, but for some reason he couldn't. He asked himself why he didn't want to talk about Stacey. It wasn't his fault that she'd taken an overdose of the pills. She could have checked them on the web. The label had advised using care. All he had done was sell her 50 slimming pills that in some circumstances, for some people, caused nasty symptoms. And death, an inner voice reminded him. He made his way through the little streets of St. John's Wood. The June sunshine fell gently on his face. He thought, why can't I just enjoy the moment? I've done nothing wrong. But that inner voice said to him, you sold those pills to that girl, and you never emphasized to her that they had side effects. You never even told her to Google them. You wanted the money. You didn't warn her. Nothing, he told himself as he let himself back into his house. There is nothing to be done. Put it out of your mind. Carl was forcing himself to write 3 or 4 paragraphs every day, but now, as he read his new pages, he admitted to himself that they weren't very good. He produced a few more lines and interrupted himself by remembering that today was the last of the month and tomorrow the 1st of July, rent day. Of course, the rent wouldn't come. It never now came the day before, though apologies sometimes did. So he wasn't surprised when Dermot tapped at his door. Letting him in, he awaited the excuses. But there were no excuses, only smiles and the handover of a brown envelope. What's this, then? Your rent, Carl. What else? You never pay me the day before, said Carl, or the day itself, come to that. Look at it this way. It may be the first time, but it may also be the last. You don't mean you're leaving? Oh, no. Dermot gave Carl another of his ghastly smiles. Carl listened to him mounting the stairs, and then asked himself what that had meant, that stuff about Dermot's payment being the last. That no rang out and echoed in his head. He wanted to get back to his writing, but concentration was impossible. Oh, no. surely meant that Dermot wasn't giving up his flat. It had been a very firm denial. Suddenly Carl saw that, firm or not, it had nothing to do with the contents of the envelope being Dermot's last payment. He had plainly said it might be the last. Could he have meant instead that at the end of next month there would be no envelope and no money? He couldn't mean that. A tenant had to pay his rent. He would have to ask Dermot what he'd meant. He couldn't go another 4 weeks with the suspense of not knowing. He climbed the top flight and thumped on the door. "Goodness me," said Dermot from inside. "Whatever's wrong? Has something happened?" "Just open the door, will you?" The door came open, but slowly, rather reluctantly. Stepping back to let Carl come in, Dermot said in the pleasantest, friendliest tone he'd ever heard from him, "Now, I do hope there isn't going to be trouble, Carl. We've had such an amicable relationship up till now. I just want you to tell me something. If I can. Now, what can I tell you? No, wait, let me make us a nice cup of coffee." "I don't want any bloody coffee," said Carl. "I want you to tell me what you meant. You said it was the first time and it might be the last. I said you're not leaving, are you? And you said, oh, no, no, no." Dermot smiled his ghastly smile and said, "I don't quite see where I went wrong. I said I wasn't leaving, and I'm not. Does that satisfy you? Not leaving, staying. Happy again?" Carl felt rage rising inside him. Dermot was playing with him. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but we have an agreement signed by both of us and witnessed, right?" Dermot had put a spoonful of instant coffee into each of 2 mugs and picked up the electric kettle. Through a window in the side of the kettle, Carl could see the water boiling. Dermot held it very close to Carl's face, and Carl flinched, jerking his chair back. Smiling, Dermot poured water onto the coffee. "Ah, but don't you remember who the witness was? I do. It was Stacey Warren. A sheet of paper taken out of your printer, written on by you and witnessed by a woman who's now passed away. Valueless, I'd say, wouldn't you?" Dermot took a gulp of the strong black coffee he'd made. "So, yes, I'm staying, but I'd say it's probable I'll never pay you rent again." "But you can't live here rent-free." "I think I can," said Dermot very calmly. "Shall I tell you why? It's DNP, dinitrophenol. I think you should know that while I'm a pretty strict follower of the Christian faith, I haven't any of what some people call honour. Now, I know you had a cabinet full of DNP. You sold 50 of those poisonous pills to Stacey Warren, didn't you? As a matter of fact, I was passing your open bathroom door when the transaction, the sale, I mean, took place." Carl would have expected someone in his situation to turn white. They did in books. Conversely, his face had flushed, and he could feel the skin burning. "It's not against the law. You can't make it against the law," he said in a tremulous voice, a voice that didn't sound like his own. Dermot got up and walked out of the room. He was back quickly, carrying a page cut from The Guardian. "You want to read that? You can keep it. I've got copies." "Killed by DNP," the line under the pictures said. Photographs of a girl and a young man and a number of yellow capsules. The police believed that the man had given the pills to the girl with the specific intention of killing her. He had used DNP as a poison. Carl read in the article that the drug could kill even if doses of it had been safely taken previously. One woman had taken it for 2 years before she died. Another's death had been mysterious until tests found that the pills by her bed were DNP. The drug was available online, and selling it wasn't against the law, but it could too easily be lethal. Carl laid down the paper. He was sweating and could feel the drops of perspiration on his upper lip. "This means nothing. The drug is not illegal." "So you won't mind if I chat to a few people about what you did?" Dermot said. 50 pills? That's a lot. More than enough to kill. And what about your reputation as a brilliant young writer? Such a promising new talent. Carl stood up. And who are these people? There's the press, of course. And I've been doing my homework. Stacey Warren had an aunt, and as it happens, I know the aunt quite well. Mrs. Yvonne Weatherspoon. She brings her cat to the clinic where I work, and it would be the easiest thing in the world to have a little chat with her about poor Stacey's death. In fact, she's due to bring the cat in for her shots tomorrow. How dare you threaten me, you blackmailer? But Dermot seemed very calm and in command of the situation. It's nasty stuff, isn't it? Mrs. Weatherspoon is a very strong-minded woman. Once she knows where poor Stacey got the DNP, she will, as they say, take it further. Stacey was well known. You're a novelist. The gossip columns will love it. I don't want to talk any more about it, said Carl. You have to pay the rent, and that's all there is to it. He would have his rent and let that criminal bastard, that blackmailer, do his worst. He would ignore him. He would get back to his writing. This brave stance buoyed Carl for a while. But when he sat down at the computer again, he found that nothing would come. Carl was forcing himself to write. He read and reread what he'd written and tinkered with words, but with no noticeable effect. He was writing stiffly. The little dialogue he attempted was stilted and strangely outdated, and his characters spoke to each other as if they lived in the middle of the last century. The reason for his failings was obvious. His mind was full of Dermot's threat to withhold the rent or ruin his reputation. The rent was due on the 31st of July, though in the usual course of things it would not be brought to him until the 1st or 2nd day of August. Would it be brought at all this time? Would Dermot carry through on his threat? Carl had avoided his tenant since their conversation, but he often heard his footsteps on the stairs. He thought about him constantly, and if he could manage to fall asleep at all, he woke in the small hours and stayed awake for the rest of the night, tossing and turning, and no doubt disturbing Nicola, creating all possible variations on what would happen if the rent didn't come, what he would do, and what Dermot would do. He'd said nothing about Dermot's threat to Nicola, reasoning that if he told her, he would also have to tell her about selling the DNP to Stacey. He should have told her long ago. Would she understand? Nicola was almost indifferent to money. Unlike the other women he knew, she was always reading books made of paper, not cyberspace, and listening to what he called classical music and she called real music. That was one reason he'd been attracted to her. She had loved his novel Death's Door. She was his biggest fan. So why hadn't he told her about Stacey? The longer he waited, the more difficult it became. Anticipating her return from work at 6:30, he found himself wishing she hadn't moved in. He reproached himself for that, telling himself that this dread would pass, that one day it would be gone, but he would still have her. "You're very quiet," she said now. "You really are worrying about something, aren't you?" "I'll be all right," he replied. "We'll have a glass of that Chablis. We could both do with it. I've had a bit of a rough day." Not compared to his day, Carl thought, or the 11 or 12 days he'd lived through since Dermot threatened him. Nicola poured the wine generously. He could hear Dermot pacing around 2 floors up. It sounded as if he was leaping up and down. "Shall we have some music, Carl?" "Not yet," he said. "I've got something to tell you." The face she turned to him was aghast. It was the only possible word. No, nothing that's going to affect you," he said. "For God's sake, don't look like that." He set his glass down, took her face in his hands, and kissed her with a gentleness that surprised even him. "There," he said. "I don't know what you'll think, and better not say a word to Dermot after what I tell you. I mean, if you felt like going up there and having it out with him. What is it? It has to do with Stacey Warren. You didn't really know her, did you? I'd met her, of course. She was your friend. Is that what's been bothering you? Her death? He waited for her to say how fat Stacey had become, but she didn't. Nicola, you know those medicines? Well, I suppose you'd call them quack remedies my dad left in the house. Stacey came to see me one day, and she found these pills. They're called dinitrophenol. It sounded better using that word, as Nicola might have read the name in the newspaper. I didn't know anything about the pills, but she said they could help her lose weight. She asked me if she could have some. Nicola took a sip of her wine. There were about 100 in the packet. I let her have 50. You gave her 50? There was no point in telling her at all if he failed to tell her the truth, so why was it so hard? He looked into her beautiful, gentle face. It would be fine. She just wanted clarification. I sold them to her, £1 each. That's the price that was listed on the package. Nicola nodded. And she died. Did she die because of the dinitro whatever? They said at the inquest that it contributed to her death. Where does Dermot come into it? She asked. He saw now that bringing his tenant in would make things much worse. Should he tell her that Dermot was threatening him? Instead, he repeated the phrase, "The pills are not against the law." Then they should be, she said. What's wrong, Nick? There was no need to ask. The tears were falling silently down her cheeks. He'd never seen her cry before. Why are you crying? You know, of course you do. I love you, or I thought I did, but I don't think I can love someone who did what you did. Gave her pills, sold her, pills that you must have known were dangerous. It's horrible. Carl shook his head. I'm not hearing this. Yes, you are. Don't you see it was bad enough giving her the stuff, let alone selling it to her? She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I can't believe you kept all this a secret from me. I should never have come to live here. Don't go, Nick. Please don't go. I'll sleep in the spare room. Carl had never felt such despair. It enclosed him in its cold emptiness. He drank about half the second of the bottles of wine they'd bought. No, Nicola had bought. He went into the kitchen and ate a slice of bread and a hunk of cheese. Later he heard Nicola getting ready for bed, using the bathroom, fetching herself a glass of water. He held his breath, hoping against hope that she had changed her mind and gone into their bedroom. But no, she hadn't. The spare bedroom door creaked a little when it closed, and now he heard the creak before the click of the lock. Rent day, the last day of the month, had gone past. By the 2nd of August, Carl knew he wouldn't be paid. He wasn't yet destitute. The second instalment of the advance he'd received on publication of Death's Door had taught him to be careful, if not frugal. And though nearly all of that had gone, he had saved a little more from the July rent that had come in. But if Dermot's August rent failed to appear, and plainly it was not going to, the demand for council tax did. That afternoon he sat down at the computer, went to the draft of his second novel, Sacred Spirits, and read with mounting disgust what he had written. It was hopeless, useless. Tinkering with it was a waste of time. After staring at the text in despair, he deleted all 10 pages. He missed Nicola so much. Her old flatmates had found room for her. She was gone. And there was Dermot. Suppose he really did stay in the flat and never paid the rent again. Perhaps Carl could tell him to leave because he wanted to sell the house. But he knew this wouldn't work. Dermot would refuse to go. There was another course to follow. Force him to pay the rent and leave him to do his worst. Dermot would no doubt tell this woman, Yvonne Weatherspoon, the tale of Carl's medicaments and the sale of the DNP to her niece Stacey. And why should it stop there? He would carry out his threat to go to the newspapers. Stacey was known to the public. It would be a juicy story. Author kills actress. Carl would never have a serious literary career again. He was making himself feel sick. He leaned over his desk, putting his head in his hands, but this did nothing to help. He ran, choking, into the kitchen and threw up into the sink. The footsteps behind him could only be Dermot's. Carl kept his head bent, ran the coal tap, switched on the waste disposal unit, hoping the noise would drive his tenant away. It didn't. "You're not very well, are you?" Dermot used his deeply concerned voice. To Carl it sounded as if he was enjoying himself. "Don't you think you should see your doctor? I'll come with you if you like." "Go away. You're ruining my life." "No, no," said Dermot. "It's you who's doing that." Carl drank some water from the tap. He wiped his mouth on the tea-cloth. Dermot said, "I came down to ask you if you'd like to go out for a drink, maybe something to eat as well." This was an instance when to respond with, "Are you joking?" was a genuine question. "No," Dermot said. "I thought it would be a good idea to get to know each other better." Carl said, "I don't want to know you better. I don't want to know you at all. I want you out of my life. Now go away, please. Please, go away." He decided to walk to Nicola's flat in Ashmill Street, telling himself he'd nothing to lose if no one let him in. Things couldn't be any worse than they already were. The Victorian terraced house where she lived was one of a long row, and must have been ugly and shabby even when it was first built. It looked empty. He rang the bell, the top bell for the top floor, then rang it again. The window above him opened and Nicola put her head out. "Let me in, Nick. Please." She smiled her beautiful Nicola smile. "I'm coming down." It wasn't all right, it couldn't be that, but it was better. He knew it was better when, as soon as she'd let him in and closed the front door, she took him in her arms and hugged him tightly. He felt like a small child whose mother had been cross with him for some misdemeanour, but had now forgiven him and loved him again as she used to. They went to bed. They slept for a while, and when they woke up, Nicola produced a bottle of port she'd bought at a fete in the village where she'd spent the previous weekend. "It's not me giving Stacey the stuff, is it?" Carl said. "It's selling it. That's the problem you've got with it." Nicola agreed. "It wouldn't be so bad if you hadn't sold it. What's Dermot going to do, or what do you think he's going to do?" Carl told her about the rent. The newspapers, maybe the police, Stacey's relatives. He calls them her loved ones. "Let's say you tell Dermot you want the rent, and he says, OK, you can have it, and the consequence is that he starts telling people, newspapers, police, whatever. Can't you face up to it? The police caution you. Isn't that the worst that can happen? You just tell everyone it's not against the law, and in time it'll blow over." Carl was silent. Then he said very slowly, "I know it's not against the law, but the national press will get hold of it, and they will say exactly what they like about me. They'll run great big headlines in, I don't know, 70 or 80-point typeface, and they can do it because all their readers will want to know about an author selling what the paper will call poison to a poor, desperate actress who's so overweight people laugh at her." "You've really thought about this, haven't you?" said Nicola. "You've sort of constructed it. Look, let's go and eat somewhere and forget about this for an evening." In Falcon Mews, something crashed onto the floor from the flat above. It must have been heavy, a saucepan or a bucket. The sound it made reverberated through the house, followed by footsteps running down the stairs and the front door slamming. The noise went on like this every day, only stopping when Dermot went to work. Carl knew it must be deliberate, intended to annoy him. It had started about the time the August rent was due, but of course never came. The noise varied, a crash made by something dropped, doors slamming, the piercing growl of an electric drill, the hammering of a nail into the wall, the TV on full. The houses in Falcon Mews were Victorian jerry-built with thin walls and not very substantial floors, so that every sound echoed and trembled. When the noise first began, Carl had been irritated by it. Now it had started to frighten him. While Nicola was at home, the noise stopped altogether. This behaviour on Dermot's part was so transparent, so obvious, that Carl found it almost incredible. Now, if he told her his tenant made a deliberate racket simply to annoy him, she wouldn't believe it. He had told her, though, and she'd begun to treat him as if he was imagining the bangs and crashes and might be hearing things as a result of the nervous state he'd worked himself up into. "I've got a couple of weeks' holiday owing to me," she said. "Why shouldn't we go away somewhere?" "I can't afford it." "Well, I can now, but I soon won't be able to if I don't get any rent." That only led to her giving him the advice she always gave him. "Tell him you must have the rent and let him, well, do his worst. You won't go to prison. Tell him to go ahead and talk to the newspapers, and once you've done it you'll feel a great relief and we'll go to Cornwall or Guernsey or somewhere." "I can't," he said. "I mean that literally. I can't do it. I can't allow him to shame me. And yet it's such a little thing, isn't it? Sometimes I dream he's dead, and when I wake up I lie there and hear him drop something, or his telly comes on, and I know he's alive and there's nothing I can do." Nicola was looking at him in horror. "Oh, Carl, sweetheart." Carl put his head in his hands. Days passed and no rent had appeared. Carl hadn't expected it, but he was still angry and miserable. He also knew that Dermot was playing some sort of complicated game, for after a week or two the noise had stopped. Even the front door was closed silently. It was so quiet that there might have been no tenant on the top floor, if he'd not occasionally seen Dermot walking down Falcon Mews on his way to or from work, or leaving for church. Then, in the middle of the next week, something made of metal, a watering can perhaps, was dropped and crashed resoundingly, bouncing across the floor above. Because he was no longer used to it, and had believed the noise had come to an end, Carl shivered and actually cried out. There was no more noise that day, but it left him trembling. He'd done no work for weeks now. The book was a dead loss, not a book at all, in fact, for he'd destroyed all of it, even the plan, and the notes he'd made before he started. He'd never wanted a real job, but now he wished he had one. It would get him out of the house. On Friday afternoon, on his way back to work, Dermot knocked on Carl's living room door. "Yes, what is it?" "Just to ask you if it'd be all right to use the garden sometimes. Sit out there, I mean. I've got a couple of deck chairs." Carl said, "That would mean coming through my kitchen." "That's right. Okay with you?" Implicit in the inquiry was it had better be. Carl shrugged, nodded, shut the door. When Nicola came in from work, Carl was waiting for her, sitting on the front step, maybe just to escape from breathing the same air as Dermot. On Sunday, they watched from a window as Dermot went to church. Like churchgoers in times gone by, he carried a prayer book. They had talked about Dermot for half the night, what he would do if crossed, and what the consequences would be. "He'll bring his deck chairs through the kitchen to the back door," said Carl. "Why deck chairs? One for him? And who's the other for? Perhaps he's got friends, but I've never seen them. The next thing will be he'll want to take over one of my rooms. Why not? I can't stop him. Yes, you can, Carl. He can tell his story to anyone he likes. How do you know they'll even care? They'll probably say, so what? If they're even interested, they'll Google it and see that what you did wasn't against the law. Tell him you want the rent, and if he says no, you'll evict him. That's what anyone else would do. She made it sound so simple, Carl thought. Let's go out for lunch, said Nicola in a cheerful tone, though she felt anything but cheerful. When they got back home, she went upstairs and looked out of the bedroom window. She called Carl. You're not going to like this, but you better see it. No one had attended to the garden since Carl's father had died. In fact, since long before that. The grass had grown tall. 2 deck chairs covered in red and blue striped canvas had been put up, and in them sat Dermot and a rather large young woman with shaggy dark hair, wearing a dirndl skirt and peasant blouse. Carl made a sound like a howl of agony. Who's that woman? His girlfriend, I should think. He hasn't got a girlfriend. Well, he has now. Nicola wanted to protect Carl from Dermot, but she didn't tell Carl this. No matter how far emancipation had progressed towards equality, a woman might tell a man she wanted to care for him, but she could not admit to him that she wanted to defend him from another man. Anyway, she seldom saw Dermot. If she heard him on the stairs, she kept inside the living room until the front door closed. They had met only once, recently, in the hallway, she going out and he coming in, he from the pet clinic, she on her way to buy something for an evening meal. You're living here full-time now, are you? He'd asked. There were several ways of putting that inquiry, and Dermot's phrasing was rather accusatory, the implication being that she shouldn't have been. She would have liked to ask him if he had any objection, but Carl's fear of Dermot was beginning to affect her too. I am, yes, she said. He shook his head, the kind of gesture that implied wonder more than disapproval. As I always say, he said, it takes all sorts to make a world. She said nothing about it to Carl. When she got back with the 2 ready meals and a bottle of rosé, her anger, which was considerable, had died down. Next day was Saturday. The weather improved, and Dermot was out in the garden with the 2 deck chairs, though only one was occupied. He must have sneaked, as Carl put it, through the kitchen with them, while Carl and Nicola were out. You'll have to tell him you don't want him in the garden, said Nicola. They were in the bedroom, looking down on the top of Dermot's head. Carl didn't say anything. You'll have to, Carl. This is only the thin end of the wedge. I've already told him he can use the garden. Don't you think that if he was going to tell anyone, I mean, about selling that stuff to Stacey? I know what you mean. I think about it every day. It haunts me. I know what you were going to say, that if he was going to tell the newspapers or her aunt or her cousins or anyone, he'd have done it by now. But why would he? He has the perfect arrangement. He could tell them tomorrow or next week. It's not something that gets easier for me, is it? The newspapers will send someone around here to interview me. He's biding his time, as he might say. He's waiting for someone or something to trigger it, and me telling him he can't sit out in my garden might be just the trigger he needs. The weather went on being nice, and Dermot sat out in the garden again the next day. Carl and Nicola knew he would because he left the deck chairs out overnight. Dermot had gone to church, but he returned at 11:30 with the fat, dark girl. They sat in the garden for an hour. Then the deck chairs were vacated, and soon a strong smell of curry permeated the house. Carl and Nicola went out. They had a drink in the Prince Alfred around the corner. It was a fine old pub, much loved by Nicola, and once loved by Carl. He loved it no longer. There was nothing that he loved. Except you, he said. I love you a lot. I really love you. But how can I marry you? He'd never mentioned marriage before. This torment will go on forever, for the rest of my life. I know it sounds mad, but it's true. I shall live in this house or another house, and he will be there with me wherever it is. He will never go, and I can't get rid of him. Sometimes I think I'll kill myself. The following Sunday afternoon, Dermot slumbered gently in his deck chair, while the girl pulled up nettles, campions and docks, and dug out their roots with a trowel. From the bedroom window, Carl looked down on them. First the deck chairs, now that girl was digging up his garden. What would be next? He had suggested to Nicola that Dermot's next move would be to take over one of Carl's own rooms. No doubt that would soon happen. But something else did. Not a takeover, but an interference in his personal life. Been wining and dining, have you? Carl and Nicola had just come in from dinner in Camden with Carl's mother. Carl didn't reply. He expected Dermot to go upstairs, but his tenant said, "Could I come in for a minute? I've got something I want to say to you." Taking over the second bedroom, Carl thought. That was what it would be. He opened the living room door, and Nicola went through to the kitchen. "These things are always awkward, aren't they?" Dermot smiled with his lips closed. "But I'm not easily embarrassed." "What did you want to say?" Nicola had come back into the room. She had a glass of water in her hand. "Well, it's unfortunate, but it's something that must be said. You were living alone when I first came here, Carl, but now you're living with this young lady, Miss Townsend. This isn't right. It is, in fact, far from right. I'm not old-fashioned. I'm a progressive kind of cove, but there I draw the line. I don't call it living in sin. That would be to go too far. But it is, to put it plainly, wrong. Now, I'm sure you'll agree with me when you think about it." Nicola drank the water, all of it, down at one gulp. She said afterwards that now she knew the meaning of stupefied. "How about you living with that woman you bring to the house? That's different, is it?" Carl asked. Dermot nodded sagely. "Ah, very different, Carl. We don't live together, you see. I've just come back from taking Sybil home to her parents, and Jerome broke up when he asked the question a second time, and even more loudly." She turned over in bed. "What?" "That woman Sybil lives there." "Carl, I have to go to work in the morning." "I don't know why I'm asking," he said. "It doesn't matter. Go back to sleep." He thought he would never sleep again. He lay there for a little while, maybe 10 minutes, and then got up and went down to the kitchen. The house was as silent as if it had been a cottage in a country lane. Upstairs, 2 floors up, Dermot would be asleep, deeply asleep in bed, without worries, at peace. Things would be like that every night, night after night, unchanging, on and on, while he, Carl, wandered wakeful around the house, growing poorer and poorer, eventually going on the dole or benefits or whatever it was called. For him, things would never change. But they would change for Dermot, who would marry that Sybil and have children with her. He'd get a better job, flourish, and one day seek him out, and he, Carl, would be a wretched, broken creature in rags in a shabby, dirty room, and Dermot would offer to buy the house from him, offer him half the price the other houses in Falcon Mews fetched, because he could. "You must stop this," he told himself. "You will drive yourself mad." But what did you do when you were caught in a trap as he was? You had to decide which was worse or better. To be utterly disgraced, your name all over the papers, your writing career ruined, to be interviewed and photographed as the man who sold poison to an unsuspecting young girl and brought about her death, or to escape that by giving up all you possessed, your only means of making a living. He couldn't see a way out. It was one or the other. He went into the living room, took a bottle of gin, the only spirits he had, and swigged what remained of it. The gin had its effect, swinging the room around, deadening him, knocking him unconscious. Nicola found him 4 hours later and lay down beside him, holding him in her arms. Even for a local weekly paper, the Paddington Express had a small circulation, but the current issue was selling better than any had for years. It led with the photograph of Stacey Warren that had previously appeared in the Evening Standard and various other dailies. The text surrounding it told of the dinitrophenol that had been obtained by Stacey not online, but by buying it from an unknown source. Dermot was given a copy of the newspaper by Sybil, who knew nothing of the DNP story, but wanted Dermot to see an ad for a second-hand bed to replace the broken-down one that had been Carl's father's. Carl's tenant, if he still was, carefully left the newspaper on the table that was the only piece of furniture in the hallway of Falcon Mews. The account in the Paddington Express didn't really say anything new, but Carl, who found the newspaper where Dermot intended him to find it, lead story headline uppermost, read everything into it that wasn't in fact there. He felt as though he was about to faint, though he had never fainted in his life. There was nowhere to sit down. He staggered dizzily into the living room and subsided into an armchair. Nicola had gone to work, as had Dermot. Reason was disappearing. Carl was past the stage of looking calmly at the situation, long past. With his increasing disgust at Dermot had come fear, and fear was now changing into terror. He was beginning to imagine horrible actions Dermot might take against him. This newspaper account was the beginning of them, for he had no doubt Dermot had fed the story to the Paddington Express. Probably even now he was passing the insinuations on to the Evening Standard, or tomorrow's Mail. No imagining was needed for the takeover of his garden, the dropping and noisy shifting of pieces of furniture, the banging of doors and the spurts of music that gushed out for 5 minutes at a time when the front door to the top-floor flat was open. Carl found that going out and walking, especially in green places and under the heavy-hanging foliage of trees, was somehow remedial. His walk this morning took him across Maida Vale and a little way down Lisson Grove in the direction of Rossmore Road. As he walked along Rossmore Road, a sign pointing to Jerome Crescent reminded him of something. Of course, Dermot's girlfriend Sybil lived there, with her parents. He turned into Jerome Crescent, where trees grew on a triangle of green grass, and decided to sit down there and wait for Sybil. She did come, but took a long time about it. He saw recognition, and something that might have been fear in her eyes. She would have avoided him, turning off the path across the green, but for his saying, "Sybil." On his feet now, he stood in front of her. "Sybil, I've been waiting for you." "Is something wrong? Is Dermot ill?" "You know what he's doing to me, don't you?" Carl wanted to say. "You know he's stopped paying me rent. He's taken over the house. He'll force me into one room and then out altogether." But confronted by Sybil, poor ignorant creature that she was, he couldn't do it. "There's nothing," he said. "I just went for a walk, and then I remembered you lived down here." In a low, weak voice, quite wrong for such a cheerful remark. "It's a beautiful day." "I'd better get on home," she said. "My mum'll be worrying." He watched her cross the road and turn into a doorway. Slowly making his way back up Lisson Grove, he realised again what he dreaded most in Dermot's threats. It wasn't the loss of income. It was the humiliation he feared. He couldn't live with the shame. The following Saturday, Nicola and Carl had walked through the Church Street market, bought some fruit and a couple of avocados, which Carl put in his backpack. Nicola was surprised to see the antique shops at the other end of Church Street. She'd never been there before and wanted to go into every shop. They held no interest for Karl, but once inside, the various vases and urns and small pieces of furniture caught his attention, even distracting him momentarily from his general despair. In Tony's treasury, Nicola fell in love, as she put it, with a green goose. It was an ornament of no possible use, but it had its charm, being made of pottery, green with white edges to each of its feathers, and a purple head with red wattles and beak. It was big, rotund, the size of a football, and very heavy to lift. "It would look lovely on your hall table," she said. "I'll buy it for you." Impossible to say he didn't want it, and equally impossible to get up much enthusiasm. He didn't ask how much it was, but found out when he saw her hand Tony 2 £20 notes and a 10. The goose was so heavy he had to carry it in his backpack with the groceries. They crossed Lisson Grove, and he led the way down the little path that ultimately brought them into Jerome Crescent. "Up there is where Sybil Soames lives." It was the first thing Karl had said to her since they left the antique shop. "That bastard's girlfriend. Those flats that are painted green, that's where she lives, with her mum and dad." Nicola followed his gaze. She took in the bicycle on the balcony and the net curtains. "You only call them that because you're a snob. You'd call them her mother and father if you didn't despise them." He said nothing. The goose in the backpack weighed heavily on his shoulders. "Why did we come here?" Nicola asked. "Something seems to draw me to this place," he said. "I can't get away from him, you see. And he's here. He may be up there now. I dream about him. I don't want to let him out of my sight, and yet I hate him. I loathe him. Oh, Karl." She took his arm, held it, and clutched his hand. "What shall we do?" "What you want me to do, I can't do. I never will. Come on, let's go home." As they walked back to Falcon Mews, along the sunlit streets, under the green trees, Karl became increasingly agitated, uttering angry denunciations of Dermot, cursing him, going over once again, twice, 3 times what had happened and what his tenant had done. Nicola kept silent. She had nothing to say, because she'd said it all. Now she was thinking what she must do. Should she force Karl to take some drastic step, perhaps? Leave the house in Falcon Mews, rent a room for both of them, find himself a regular day job? Or should she abandon him, leave him behind? She thought, I used to love him. Do I still love him? He hardly speaks but to rage against Dermot. He sleeps a little, dreams violently, cries out, and sits up fighting against something that isn't there. I would be better without him. But would he be better without me? She didn't know the answer. How pretty Falcon Mews was on a sunny day. They went into the house, into the dim silence. Karl put the food and drink into the fridge, took the backpack upstairs, and dropped it on the bedroom floor. Nicola was looking out of the kitchen window into the back garden, where she could see Dermot in one of the deck chairs reading a magazine. Sybil had acquired a pair of lawn trimmers and was cutting the edges where the grass met the flower beds, where the nettles used to be. She was the kind of woman, Nicola thought, who always had to be doing something, weeding, cutting, chopping, cooking, cleaning, a gift to a man. Karl was silent now, but when he saw those two, as he must sooner or later, he would start his agonized complaints again. She couldn't leave him, but nor could she put up with him much longer. Suppose she did what Dermot hadn't yet done, and might never do. Only she and he knew the truth of what had happened on the day Karl sold the DNP to Stacey Warren. If she told the whole story to a newspaper, and if, say, the Paddington Express used it and passed it to the Evening Standard, it would be in the public domain. Wasn't that what they called it? Just as much as if Dermot had told them. Dermot wouldn't have been responsible for its appearance, she would. But the effect would be the same. Dermot would no longer have anything to hold over Karl. He would therefore be obliged to pay Karl's rent once more, or leave. Also, Carl might demand rent arrears and surely get them. Once that had been done, he could evict Dermot. And what of her? She would have to tell Carl it was she who had, well, betrayed him. He might never want to see her again, but as things were, she couldn't continue with him like this. She went to the fridge and opened the still rather warm white wine they'd bought in Church Street. Well, not they. It was she who had bought it. Carl had almost run out of money. She poured the wine and carried in the glasses, and found Carl at the back window, looking through a barrier of leaves and branches and privet bushes at Sybil chopping away at the lawn edge, and Dermot apparently sleeping in his deck chair. Carl took the glass and gulped down half of its contents, the way it had become an obsession. Carl understood that his behaviour was just as much that of a fanatical lover as of a fixated hater. He followed Dermot with his eyes whenever he had the opportunity, listened for what he could hear of him, outside the door at the top of the stairs, his music, his footsteps, and his words on the phone or when he spoke to Sybil. When Dermot approached the door, Carl ran down the top flight of stairs to hide in his own bedroom. Once or twice he'd followed Dermot to work. If Dermot had turned round and seen him, he wouldn't have cared. But he didn't turn round. Carl watched as Dermot went into the pet clinic by a back door. Then the clinic lights came on, and he walked away. He had also begun to follow Dermot to Sybil's parents' house when he walked her home in the evenings. Mostly he set off with Sybil at about 9:30 in the evening. Their walk took about 20 minutes, and they always went the same way, down Castellane Road into Clifton Gardens and across Maida Vale into St. John's Wood Road to Lisson Grove. They kept always to those same wide roads and never took the shortcut along the canal path. Although it was lit, it was much darker along there, a lover's walk under the trees. Did Dermot avoid it with Sybil for that reason? Because it was somehow intimate, sheltered, a place for kissing? On the way back, though, he did go that way. After he'd kissed Sybil's cheek, watched her go into the flats, waved once, he turned round and took the little path that went over the canal bridge and led along the dark water. He walked very slowly, pausing to look down onto the glassy canal. Carl watched from the other side of Lisson Grove. When he was at university, he'd belonged to the Dramatic Society, and the high spot of his second year had been their performance of Measure for Measure. A line came back to him, a phrase really. The Duke of Dark Corners. Dermot looked like that, with his round shoulders and long, thin neck, almost a medieval figure, dressed in a dark jacket, black jeans tucked into black boots. Under the bridge at Lisson Grove, and under the bridge at Aberdeen Place, were dark corners, footpaths melting into blackness. If Carl wondered about Dermot, why he always walked to Jerome Crescent the way he did and returned along the towpath, he also wondered at himself. What made him follow Dermot? What did he get out of it? He didn't know. He just had a compulsion to do it. Sunday, and Dermot had come back from church with Sybil and a crowd of other people. Carl, watching from upstairs, saw him unlock the front door and welcome them all in. It was another fine day, clouds across the blue sky, but plenty of sunshine too. There were 2 women among them, apart from Sybil, and all wore bright floral dresses. Sybil's had a pattern on it of pink cabbage roses on a black background. The door shut with a bang. Nicola was out at a brunch with 2 of her ex-flatmates. She had said nothing about coming back that evening, but he expected her. Even if those people were still in the garden, still eating and drinking, her return would be a comfort. He would ask her about the pottery goose. Did she really want it? He didn't care if there was an ornament on the hall table or not. He had eaten no lunch, had eaten nothing, and there was no wine in the house. In the kitchen was half a loaf of bread and a piece of cheese left over from last evening's dinner. He lay on the bed and fell asleep, overcome with despair. At some point in the afternoon or early evening, it was still light, he was awakened by the party guests going home. He got up and watched them go. The sky had clouded over and a wind got up. The tree branches in Falcon Mews swayed and all the leaves fluttered. He searched for his phone, but it had run out of charge. If Nicola didn't come bringing food, he would have to go out and buy himself something to eat. Though it was Sunday, all the shops round here stayed open till late. He picked up the backpack, and its weight told him the goose was still inside. He'd take it back to Tony's treasury, he decided, and see what Tony would give him for it. He heard Dermot's footsteps on the stairs, and Sybil's. He wouldn't be walking her home yet, but maybe taking her out to dinner. Some snack at one of the cafes on the Edgware Road, Carl thought, contemptuously. This would be an evening when he wouldn't follow them. Nicola had left some money in a jacket pocket, a £20 note and £5 coins. He wrote on an orange post-it he took from a pad in the other pocket, "Borrowed £25, kiss kiss." That would be enough to get something to eat, in case Tony refused to buy back the green goose. Dermot and Sybil had disappeared when he came out into the mews. Carl walked along Sutherland Avenue and across Maida Vale into Hall Road, and from there into Lisson Grove, where a crowd was coming out of the Roman Catholic Church. There was a Tesco in Church Street that would still be open. But Tony's treasury wasn't. Carl hadn't anticipated this, that Tony might refuse to take the goose back. Yes, that was possible, but not for his shop to be closed. The Tesco was open, though, and still had a couple of Sunday papers on the rack outside. He bought a loaf of bread, a piece of cheddar, a bar of chocolate, and a half bottle of rosé, using the money he'd taken from Nicola. Carl wanted to avoid seeing Dermot. He didn't think Dermot would be near the canal, but when he and Sybil had eaten, they would walk back to Jerome Crescent via the little path that ran from Lisson Grove. So Carl followed a route that was new to him, into Lisson Green, where the canal came out from under the Aberdeen Place Bridge. The water was dark here, the path along the bank deserted. He also noticed that you could see the path from Lisson Grove, and see too where the canal disappeared under the next bridge on its way through Regent's Park. He sat down on a wooden bench and ate some bread and cheese. He was surprised to find how hungry he was. The path continued to be deserted. After a while, he made his way into Pavely Street. It was there, looking for a path out, that he saw Dermot and Sybil up ahead in Jerome Crescent, entering the block where Sybil lived. Lights were on in a couple of windows in the block. Carl sat down on a stack of bricks. He didn't know why. He certainly wasn't waiting for Dermot. He didn't understand what it was that brought him here so regularly, to watch what Dermot did, what they both did, as if they were fascinating people whose activities were of enormous interest, rather than the reverse. He got up and walked round the block, round Jerome Crescent and back. As he watched, a light in one of the windows went out, then the other one. He moved into deep shadow as Dermot appeared at the entrance, then emerged into the half-light and crossed the street towards him. "Hello there. What brings you here?" Dermot sounded surprised. "I've got something to show you," Carl said. "I brought you a present." "That's awfully decent of you," said Dermot, like a public schoolboy of 100 years ago. "For my engagement, is it?" "That's right." Carl suddenly decided to give him the goose. He didn't know why he'd said he had a present, just an odd impulse. He bent over the backpack and started unzipping it. For a brief moment, while Dermot watched, anticipating his present, Carl began taking the goose out. Then abruptly he lifted the backpack as high as he could and brought it down hard on Dermot's head. He was taller than Dermot, and there was a crunch of bone. Dermot uttered a long, dull groan. It was the only sound he made, as he slumped over onto the pavement. Careful not to touch Dermot, Carl bent over him to see whether he was still breathing. He didn't appear to be. Then Carl picked up the bag. He couldn't see any blood. Perhaps it was too dark, or there wasn't any. He hoisted the backpack onto his shoulders and for some reason looked at the windows that had been lit up. Both were still in darkness, though he fancied he saw a faint flicker of movement behind the higher one. He thought, "Why did I never think of doing this before? For months I've been desperate to get rid of this awful threat, this burden." He felt no guilt, no regret. He felt relief. He walked away and up the path into Lisson Grove. It was as well the backpack was on his back, because his hands were shaking so much as to be useless for carrying anything. He climbed up the hill past the Catholic church, turned into Lodge Road, and walked along beside the high walls above the railway line. Walking was automatic, his legs carrying him mechanically towards a safer place. A single cyclist rode past him and up to Cross Park Road. Carl went across the road after him and down a path into the green, the trees, the dense leafiness that clustered and shivered in the rising wind along the canal bank. The water was black and still and shiny. He hoisted the backpack off his shoulders, unzipped it, and lifted out the green goose. Something dark was on his hands, but whether it was blood or not, he couldn't tell. He looked about him into the trees above, the leaves making a soft whispering sound. The screen of branches that hid the road running alongside Regent's Park was dense and dark. The man on the bike had disappeared, was no doubt far away now, heading for Primrose Hill or Camden Town. Carl knelt down on the canal bank and dropped the backpack into the water. It floated for a few moments, then sank with a sucking, glugging sound. He remained on his knees for perhaps 2 minutes, holding the goose, then got to his feet with difficulty, like an old man, feeling about him in vain for something to hold on to. Carrying the goose under one arm, he started to walk back. He climbed up into Park Road and thought, without quite knowing why, that it would be better to go back along the St. John's Wood Road rather than Lodge Road. It started to rain, a drizzle at first, blown about by the wind, but soon it changed to a great storm. Good, Carl thought. It would wash Dermot's blood off him, although he was pretty sure what little there was had been on the backpack. He could feel the rain lashing against him and streaming down his back and legs. It changed him from being mildly warm to a sudden sharp cold, and a huge weariness took hold of him, an exhaustion so powerful that he stumbled as he walked. The rain had driven home those people who had been in the streets. Sutherland Avenue was deserted, apart from the Tesco supermarket, where cars still came and went, skidding through puddles. Turning into Castellane Road and staggering to the corner of the Mews, he found himself dreading that Dermot might be there, waiting inside the front door to make some fatuous remark. Then he remembered. No Dermot, never again. But Nicola was there, opening the door just as he reached out with his key. She took one look at his sodden clothes, and without asking him why he was carrying her, the police arrived at 10 to 1 when Carl had almost given them up. He had to tell himself as he was walking towards the front door not to speak to them unless they spoke to him, not to express any opinions about Dermot, not to ask questions, above all, not to speak of murder, or of Dermot as the murdered man. They told him rather baldly what had happened. They asked only one question, and that was whether they could go into Dermot's flat. No reason was given. Did they know Dermot had a fiancée? Did she know what had happened? Oh yes, they would take care of notifying her, said the older man. Carl gave them a key, and they went upstairs. Poor Sybil. Perhaps she'd loved Dermot, been in love with him, And now this had happened. Don't be a fool, Carl told himself. Pull yourself together. The police came back downstairs. The younger one was carrying a briefcase, and it seemed to Carl to have more in it than when they'd gone up. Papers, certificates, records of something or other. Of no interest to him. Nothing to do with him. Nothing to incriminate him. The older one said it might be helpful to have his phone number in case they needed to get in touch, and Carl gave it to him. He saw them out, went into the living room, and sat down. He had nothing to do, almost nothing to think about. But after a time, his mind filled with scenes of the previous evening, of the dark waters of the canal, and his backpack floating, then sinking with that queer sucking sound, and of the fat, round pottery goose, as green as the grass and the oak leaves, sitting on the hall table, quietly mocking him. Nicola came home early, bringing with her the Evening Standard. Carl had no desire to read the details, but he looked at the picture of Dermot. When he was alive, of course. There was no picture of him dead. And read the story to please Nicola. She wanted to talk about what had happened, as more or less everyone in Maida Vale would now be discussing the case. Why would anyone kill Dermot? Money was the general consensus, or even to steal his phone. Was his phone missing? The newspaper didn't say. They walked to the Canal Café on the Edgware Road and ate fish and chips and drank lager. Soon, thought Carl, when I find a new tenant, I'll have money to pay for things myself. 2 days passed, and the police didn't return, nor did they phone. The only caller was Sybil. Carl wasn't particularly surprised by this visit, though he hadn't exactly expected to see her. What astonished him was her appearance. She was dressed in deep mourning, long black skirt, big black shoulder bag, high-necked black blouse and black jacket, her head wrapped in a black scarf like a Muslim woman. He knew he ought to say how sorry he was for her loss, and he did say it, hesitating over the words, almost stammering. She came into the hallway saying, "Yes, it's been terrible for me. I shall never get over it." She walked straight upstairs and, with the key Dermot must have given her, let herself into the top flat. She had come for some of her things she'd left behind, Carl supposed. Nothing could be more likely, seeing that she'd spent day after day here with Dermot. And sure enough, after about 10 minutes, she came back down the stairs, the black bag stuffed with what appeared to be heavy objects. Opening the door, she said to him, oddly, he thought, that he hadn't seen the last of her. Carl couldn't help thinking that her words might have been Dermot's. In the days following the murder, Carl thought of almost nothing else. Only a psychopath or a hitman, or perhaps a soldier in battle, could kill someone and put the killing out of his mind. He had hated Dermot, but just the same found it impossible to be sanguine about the murder. A much more satisfactory solution to the problem would have been Dermot's removing himself to a different address, or his getting married and buying a flat somewhere with Sybil. Carl found himself close to resenting the fact that Dermot had brought his death on himself by his stupid, inverted blackmail. A strange thought it was that Dermot had directly courted murder by refusing to pay his rent. But he still couldn't stop thinking about it, all the time and every day. Nicola, who knew the murder preyed on his mind, told him he must get over it. "You're not involved," she said. "I wouldn't say you ought to be glad, of course not, but it has taken a weight off your mind. It's removed a worry." "I wouldn't want to think like that," he said, conscious of outrageous hypocrisy. "It must be wrong in anyone's philosophy to feel relief at someone's death, especially death by violence." That night he had the first of his dreams. He could hear a moaning from upstairs that grew in volume and suddenly broke off. He climbed the stairs, and it was a slow climb, his steps made sluggish by some unseen force, but he reached the top at last and made his way into the living room. All was silent. Dermot lay on the floor, his face and head a bloody mass of torn flesh and broken bones. Carl tried to cry out, but only a whimpering sound came. He was sitting up in bed when he woke, and the whimpering went on. Nicola was asking him what was wrong. He didn't answer her. He forced himself to lie down and breathe steadily. She reached out and took hold of his hand. He thought, I killed someone. I murdered a man. That's something that will never go away. It will be with me forever, for the rest of my life and beyond, if there is a beyond. Nothing I can do will ever get rid of it. There was no sign of Sybil the next day. Carl hoped she might have gone away on holiday with her parents, although the season appeared to be over and most people were back at work. While Nicola was having a shower in his bathroom, he went upstairs to use the bathroom that had been Dermot's, and found the place full of what Sybil would call toiletries. He was thinking later how he must tell her to take them away, when he realised he had no phone number for her, and although he knew where she lived, no email or postal address. Just as he was deciding he must go to Jerome Crescent and put a note through her door, he heard her footsteps on the stairs. But now that his chance had come, he felt rather awkward telling her he'd had a shower in the bathroom that had been Dermot's. He waited, listening, and when he heard her leave, he felt sure she wouldn't come back again. She would have completed whatever tasks had brought her back to Dermot's rooms. He went upstairs and found the bathroom just as it had been, full of her things. What did it really matter that a few jars of bath oil and sachets of cheap shampoo were left behind? Leave it a day or two, and then he would throw them all away. Carl found that he was becoming acutely aware of Sybil's presence, though he didn't know how. On Saturday evening, Nicola asked him how he knew that Sybil was in the house, and he couldn't tell her. He just knew. She conceded he had been right when she saw Sybil walking down the mews next morning on her way to church, prayer book in hand. She had clearly spent the night upstairs. It was time to tell her to leave and take her pots and jars with her. Next morning, Carl went upstairs and knocked on the door. She looked at him unsmiling, as if she'd never seen him before. What was it you wanted? Not to be left on the doorstep, he thought. Can I come in? If you want. He stepped over the threshold. She left the door open. I'd like you to take your things out of the bathroom, he said, when you go home. I'm going out now. I've got to go to work. Yes, of course, but later on you must come back here and take your stuff. She nodded, a meaningless gesture. Dermot told me when we first started courting that we would live here together. Courting? It was the word that shocked him rather than the content of what she said. He had never before heard anyone actually use it. Yes, it's very sad what happened. I'll see you later, he said. From his front window, he watched her go. He realised he didn't know where she worked or what she did. Why should he know or care? She would be gone by the end of today, and he would never have to see her again. Sybil returned from work before Nicola did. Carl wouldn't have known this if he hadn't been watching for her. He went out into the hall just as she had her heavily booted right foot on the lowest stair. Sybil, you'll be going home this evening, I assume. Don't forget to take your stuff from the bathroom. In a calm, straightforward tone, she said, This is my home. This is where I live. No, no. Nervous as he was, he had to treat her as if she was simple. You live with your parents in Jerome Crescent. Now give me my key. You won't need it again. I live here, she said. I must go up now. I've things to see to. No, Sybil, I'm very sorry about Dermot, but I shall have a new tenant coming in. That's why you need to go. That's why I need the key. I'm the new tenant, she said. I told you Dermot said I was to live here. I have to hold on to the key. I'm taking over my fiancé's tenancy. Carl said nothing. To think that he'd believed her naive, an ignorant fool. He went into the bathroom and threw up. Because he'd eaten nothing all day, he vomited only yellow liquid. He was still in the bathroom when Nicola came home. He had reached a stage where he had to remind himself that she didn't know he had killed Dermot. Sometimes, when he thought about it, he seemed to remember telling her and her forgiving him, or overlooking it or something. She doesn't know. Hold on to that, he told himself. But I can tell her about Sybil, what Sybil said. I must ask her what to do. Sybil is here, he said. She says she's the new tenant. She won't give me the key. She must. Tell her you'll get the police to put her out. I couldn't do that. Then I will. No. The idea of the police coming meant only one thing to him, Dermot's murder. They would become suspicious. No, Nick, we can't do that. Would it be too bad to have her as the new tenant? I mean, she'd be steady and quiet and regular in her habits. I know I sound like an old-time landlady. And she wouldn't make trouble. I'm not hearing this, Nicola said. It would make things easy. There'd be money coming in. She'd be on her own. She wouldn't bring men home. What's happened to you, Carl? You're young. You don't talk and think like that. In a scathing tone, she said, She wouldn't bring men home. She wouldn't make trouble. She'd be quiet and steady. She didn't wait for his defence. What's got into you? You have to turn her out. She can go back to her parents. I don't want her here. We'll find someone else. He spoke to her in a tone that he had never thought possible. This is my house. I decide about tenants, not you. She didn't argue. Her face... Next morning, Carl watched Sybil in the garden before she went to work, pulling up the few weeds she had allowed to take root there, cutting off the dead heads from flowers he didn't know the names of. She probably worked as someone's cleaner, he thought. That was what she looked like. Perhaps she would clean for him. He must get her a rent book, something he'd never done for Dermot. It would be more businesslike. He sat down at the laptop and contrived a sort of contract. He asked himself why he was treating the process with such weight and formality. Dermot's contract had never been handled like this. Sybil came back at 5. Her shoes made a flapping sound as she walked upstairs. A bit less than an hour later, Nicola arrived, carrying a basket of strawberries, a carton of cream, and a bunch of pink and purple flowers she said were zinnias. Carl showed her the contract. She nodded. You're still going through with this, then? You agreed it was a good idea. I don't think so, Carl. As you said, it wasn't for me to agree or disagree. It's your house. It was a hot day, and a thick, humid warmth had risen to the landing. Sweat broke out on his face, on his upper lip, as he climbed the stairs. He had a strong, quite unreasonable feeling of impending doom. Sybil opened the door before he got there, and was standing just inside. It's very hot up here, he said, when he was in the even more stifling atmosphere of the living room. Don't you want to open the windows? I never open windows, she said. It lets insects in. He unfolded the sheet of paper on which he'd typed the contract and laid it on the round table. I have the rent contract. Would you like to read it? She didn't sit down, but just glanced at the contract. I don't need to read it. I told you I'm living here. Dermot said I should. Yes, perhaps, but you still have to pay me rent. She shook her head vigorously. I don't pay rent. Why should I? I already said I'm living here. I don't think you understand. If you have rooms in someone else's property, you have to pay for it. You have to pay by the week or month. That's what this paper is about. I'll call Nicola in to witness it, if you know what that means, and then you sign and I sign, and she sees us do that and she signs. Okay? No, Sybil said. It's not okay. I haven't got the money. Well, I'm sorry, but that means you'll have to go. That awful shaking of the head began again. "I'm staying here like Dermot did. He never paid rent, not a penny, and I'm not either. This is my home now." "No, it's not, Sybil. If you don't go, I shall have to fetch the police to put you out." She took a step towards him, and a cunning look spread across her face. There was deceit in it, and a half-smile. "I saw you hit Dermot with that bag you carry," she said. "It must have had something heavy in it. I was in my bedroom and I saw you from the window. He just lay there. I went to bed. He was still there in the morning. I went out there at 5 and saw him. You killed him like a killer on TV." Carl stared at her. "I'll tell the police if you make me leave. I didn't go to them before, as I've always wanted somewhere to live that's not with my parents, but couldn't afford it. Now I have this place, and I don't have to pay any rent at all." An analogy people made when something bad had happened was to say it was a nightmare. Carl was somewhere worse than a nightmare, a conjuring of horror only bearable if he knew he would wake up. He lacked the strength to speak, and she saw this. She was watching him closely, not quite with a smile, but with a calm, satisfied look. "I'll keep it nice," she said. "I'll pay for the electric and the gas. No need to worry about that. And I'll do the garden for free. It won't cost you." Still, Carl couldn't speak. He got up and walked out, stumbling a little. Nicola was downstairs doing something in the kitchen, preparing a meal, perhaps. The flowers she'd bought were in a vase on the windowsill. Carl stared at the vase, then lay down on the floor and buried his face in his hands. Nicola came in with the strawberries in a bowl and a jug of cream. "Oh, Carl, sweetheart, what's wrong?" He lifted his head, then struggled to his feet. He couldn't tell her. He couldn't tell her he was a murderer. He couldn't tell her anything. Sybil's parents paid her a visit at the flat in Falcon Mews on a dreary Sunday. They came along the mews under a single large black umbrella, which they only folded up when Sybil answered the door. "She'll want me to meet them," Carl said to Nicola. "You'll see. Maybe they'll have tea first, and then she'll bring them down here and present them to me." "Does it matter?" "Well, insofar as nothing matters any more, no, it doesn't." "Carl, what's wrong? Why does nothing matter? If you don't want Sybil living here, why did you say she could?" "I can't answer that, Nick. I will never be able to answer that. I would if I could, but you have to take it from me that it's impossible. She's here forever, or until she chooses to go." For a while Carl had convinced himself that what he had done was not important, but gradually guilt and shame had arrived, as well as not so much a fear of discovery as a fear of some kind of retribution for his wickedness. He knew now that his action, irrespective of Dermot's own wrongdoing, would always be with him, day after day, year after year. In the unlikely, indeed impossible, event of his confessing his crime, asking for forgiveness, walking into the police station and telling whoever was there that he'd killed a man, would his fear go away? When his guilt was known, when everyone knew, perhaps he would no longer be haunted by it. But it was with him now, and inhabited his body like his heart did. It slept with him and woke with him. It lived with him like an organ. It would never leave. Footsteps sounded heavily on the stairs, and Sybil called out, "Hi there, Carl." She'd recently stopped calling him Mr. Martin. "Can I bring my mum and dad in to make your acquaintance?" He would have liked to tell her to go to hell, never to speak to him again, but he got up and opened the door. One thing particularly struck him about the couple at the foot of the stairs. They were nervous. Of him or of Sybil? "These are my mum and dad," said Sybil. "They're called Cliff and Carol. This is Mr. Martin." Carol Soames said she was pleased to meet him. Cliff Soames said nothing for a moment, but looked around the room, apparently without approval. "You own this place, do you?" he said, fixing Carl with a stare. "I told you he did, Dad." "Let's hear what he has to say for himself. Belongs to you, does it? Young man like you?" "Yes," Carl said. "Sybil says your dad left it to you. A whole house to do as you like with. That true?" Carl hated this man's attitude. Whatever hold Sybil had over him, he wasn't obliged to take this. "Yes, I can do with it as I like, and one of the things I'm going to do is turn you out of it. Now get out and take your fat wife with you." Immediately he said it, he regretted that fat. "Go on, leave," he continued. "Get out now. I never want to see you here again." They hurried out quickly, clearly in shock at Carl's anger. Sybil stared at him. "Don't think that bothered me. I don't care if I never see them again." She lumbered up the stairs without another word. Nicola had heard it all, coming silently from the kitchen and standing in the doorway. "You were very rude," she said, "but you managed to stop the lecture he was going to give you on capitalism versus anarchy." "Maybe." "Shall we go out? Do something?" "All right," Carl said, still in the same gloomy, downcast tone. As they walked along the mews, Carl began to consider, not for the first time, what he could or should tell Nicola. But as before, there was no answer that was both a reason for no money coming in, such as Sybil's being unable to afford the rent, and, far more difficult to explain, for his tolerating this void like some sort of rich philanthropist. No one would believe such a tale, and certainly not Nicola, who knew him so well, who knew he disliked Sybil, who knew how totally strapped for cash he was. He said to her suddenly, "Is there anything I can do to make money quickly? I mean, get a job tomorrow or very soon that will bring me in, say, £150 a week?" "Oh, Carl, you don't know much about wages, do you? How could you? But you don't have to. You'll get £1,200 next week." He would have to tell her the truth, but the truth was so terrible that he would lose her. If she wouldn't tolerate his selling a drug to Stacey, how could he expect her to accept that he'd killed a man? And what would she do about it? Force him to go to the police? But would it take much forcing? "Where are we going?" he asked now. "Where would you like to go?" "A pub," he said. "To have a drink, something strong. I need it." On the walk back, Carl had come to a decision. He would tell her that he'd killed Dermot. But looking at her now, so beautiful and loving, he knew it was impossible. He couldn't even pretend it had happened by accident. There was nothing he could invent to account for lifting up that bag with its green pottery contents and bringing it down on Dermot's head. "You were going to tell me why you fear Sybil won't pay the rent next week. You were, weren't you?" Nicola said. "She thinks I killed Dermot, and she says she'll tell the police she saw me do it if I make her pay. That's what it amounts to," Carl said in a single breath. Nicola looked shocked. "She can't. She's out of her mind. She can't think that way. Where does she get such an idea? To suspect you, of all people, a gentle person like you, of doing such a thing?" He said nothing for a moment. He was wondering what she would say if he told her the truth. "Of course the poor woman's mentally ill," Nicola went on. "But to accuse you with her insane belief, why didn't you tell me before?" "I don't know. But now you can see why I can't risk her going to the police with this story." "But it isn't true, Carl. They wouldn't believe her. You'd tell them the truth and then ask her to get out of this house. You would find someone else for the flat." "Nick, my sweetheart, I can't do that. Leave it now. You know what the situation is. Wait till tomorrow or Wednesday, say, and if the rent comes, we'll know she's thought better of her accusation and all is well." Most of the pet owners at the clinic accepted Lizzie Milsom without question. One of the few exceptions was Yvonne Weatherspoon. "Where's Dermot?" she asked. Lizzie didn't know what to say. Surely Yvonne knew. It had been all over the papers and even on the London regional news. "Didn't you see it on TV?" "What do you mean, on TV?" "Well, he was murdered. It was on TV and in all the papers. They still haven't got anyone for it." "I saw about that Dermot," said Yvonne, "but I didn't connect it with our Dermot. My God, what a dreadful thing. I'm really shocked." She pointed to the occupant of the cat box. "Sophie knows. You can tell, can't you? It's been a shock to her as well, poor angel." Lizzie was the kind of person for whom designated future tasks loomed large. There was little pleasure to be anticipated in completing the task Caroline had set for her, to carry all the items that had once belonged to Dermot to Falcon Mews. Lizzie had a look inside the storage cupboard to assess the weight of the late Dermot's property. A pair of sheepskin gloves, a framed photograph of a dark girl with a fat face and heavy shoulders, an ancient Bible, 3 box files, 2 notebooks, and a box of paper fasteners, all added up to considerable weight. She decided that she'd postpone the task till the following week. Carl slept well that night, but awoke next morning to a weight of dread that shaped itself into sickness. He waited for Sybil's footsteps on the stairs, holding his breath. They sounded, a heavy clumping, and then came the front door banging with more of a crash than usual. Nicola went to work. She told him she would be late home because she was going out in the evening with 2 of her old flatmates. She said goodbye to him that morning with more than usual tenderness and love, and he was sure this was due to that convincing lie he had told. Perhaps he should lie to her more. But no, there were only a few hours left if he did what he meant to do. And he must. Sybil was asking to die, as Dermot had. This was another thing the two had in common, a propensity to invite their own deaths. But this death couldn't come from the stairs or from a fall from a window. Instead, some impulse sent him up to the bathroom and the store of alternative medicine his father had accumulated. The 50 capsules of the dinitrophenol, DNP, that Stacey had not purchased, were there in the front of the cabinet. And there too, behind them, was the powder-to-liquid variety in sachets. It said on the leaflet that the sachets should be dissolved in water and then drunk down. This was what Carl was looking for. Offering Sybil the DNP powder would be no more murder than selling DNP to Stacey had been. The last thing he'd wanted was to kill Stacey, but he wanted this concoction to kill Sybil. Had Sybil read the coroner's report in the newspaper? Would she know about DNP? Probably not. Sybil didn't impress Carl as the type who would read much of any newspapers, including the tabloids. Carl took the box of sachets down to the kitchen. The only difficulty now, he thought, was how to get Sybil to take it. If Nicola came upon it, she would know what it was. She must never see it. But she wouldn't be home this evening before about 10, and by that time the deed could be done. At lunchtime he went out. Nicola had left him some money, a £20 note, and although he knew she had meant it for food, he spent it on 2 bottles of wine. Before Sybil was due home, he placed a couple of DNP sachets on the hall table on top of the leaflet. She came in at 10 minutes to 6, and 10 minutes later he found her standing over the table reading the leaflet. His heart thumped. "I'm glad I've caught you," he said. "I wanted to ask you in for a drink. It doesn't have to be alcohol. Nicola's away for the evening, you see, and I wanted some company." She looked him in the face, puzzled. "Well, okay. I don't mind." I thought it would be a good idea for us to try to be friends. I know we haven't been on very good terms, but that ought to change, don't you think?" Astonishingly, she seemed to believe him. "I'll just go up and leave my stuff," she said. He went back into the living room, but came out after a minute to see if she had taken the sachets on the table. She hadn't. Would she ask him about them? She returned more quickly than he expected, having changed her t-shirt and cardigan for a fussy pink blouse with a frill round the neck, and her boots for court shoes from which her feet bulged. Was she trying to look attractive for him? He found that disgusting. He offered her Nicola's breakfast orange juice. "You're having wine, aren't you? I'll have some of that," she said, evidently not as abstemious as Dermot had been. Carl handed her a glass of the Pinot Grigio he'd bought that afternoon. She took it without a word, then said, "Haven't you got any nibbles?" "I'm afraid not." "You want to get some in. I shouldn't have them, though. I don't want to put on any more weight." Again he felt that thump of the heart. Should he mention the sachets and the leaflet in the hall? Better not. Snacks between meals aren't a good idea. He could hardly believe he'd uttered such a sentence. "Are you on a diet?" was the nearest he would get to touching on the substance and the directions in the hallway. "I like my food too much for that," she said. She drank a long draught of her wine. "Does wine put weight on you?" "I don't know, Sybil." "Give me a fill-up, will you?" He did, willingly, now that he could sense the question that was coming. "What's that stuff out in the hallway?" He wouldn't offer it to her. "I don't know. Nicola left it there." "I better go up now. I've got my tea to get." He stood up to see her out, then went back into the room and listened. She had come back down the stairs and was just outside the door. He heard a little sound, then footsteps on the stairs again. Waiting for the footfalls to fade up the stairs was the longest he'd ever waited for anything in his life. Yet it could only have endured for a minute at the most. Then he went outside. The sachets and leaflet had gone from the table. Just before 10, Nicola came home. It occurred to him that he shouldn't have told Sybil that it was Nicola who had put the sachets and the leaflet in the hallway. But surely Sybil wouldn't mention this to Nicola. She never spoke to her. Still, it was a small, niggling worry. Next day, Sybil went to work. Her morning departure coincided with Nicola's, and they set off together, sharing an umbrella. They might have been friends, once schoolfellows, chatting away and smiling. Is she telling Nick now? Carl thought. Is she explaining how she took the sachets without permission, just picked them up from the hall table? Why had he been such a fool as to give Sybil that explanation for their presence? Sybil came home at 5, which was early for her. Watching her from the ground floor window, he seemed to see purpose in her heavy tread, as if, on her journey home, she had decided on some particular step to take. She was lost to his sight as she let herself into the house. Nothing happened. Carl made himself a cup of tea. Why had Sybil come home early? Perhaps she'd said she wasn't well. But it didn't matter. She was home, and it must be to take the DNP. It occurred to Carl then how significant dinitrophenol had been in his life, first leading to Dermot's behaviour, his blackmail, and his death, now ridding him, he hoped, of Dermot's blackmailing girlfriend. He sat downstairs, listening, though for what he didn't know. All he heard was his phone ringing. Nicola. "A girl I know at work has 2 tickets for the cinema," she told him. "Her friend who was going with her can't, so she's offered it to me. I won't be late." He was glad she wouldn't be there. There might just be silence. On the other hand, there might be shouting or screaming. The first symptom would be sweating. Sybil's temperature could go up to 46 degrees. She wouldn't have taken the stuff upstairs with her if she didn't mean at least to try it, he thought. He must wait. There was still no sound from upstairs. Lizzie Milsom was sitting outside a restaurant in Clifton Road, reading the Evening Standard. She drank her coffee and ate the chocolate biscuit that came with it. She picked up the large bag containing the late Dermot McKinnon's property and hoisted its straps onto her shoulder. It was 10 to 7. It felt to Lizzie quite a long walk to Falcon Mews, especially as she was carrying a heavy bag. Her boyfriend Adam phoned when she was in Castellane Road. He'd finished the work he was doing and said he would come and meet her. Lizzie told him the number of the Mews house where she'd be. 5 minutes later, she was ringing the doorbell. The doorbell ringing shocked Carl. It made him furiously angry. It was like an insult, an intrusion, and an assault. Who dared come here? And now? It rang again. He ran downstairs to answer it. He needed to get rid of whoever it was. He opened the door, flinging it back. "Yes, what is it?" A girl stood outside. "I brought some stuff from the pet clinic that belonged to Dermot McKinnon. I believe he lived in the top flat. We didn't know where else to take it." She stepped in, swinging a large bag, before he could stop her. "You can't go up," he shouted. But she was already on the stairs, and he could only have stopped her now by seizing hold of her. A shrill cry came from behind the half-open door on the top floor, followed by a hoarse sobbing. Lizzie ran up another 4 or 5 steps, stopped and called, "What's that? What's going on up there?" "Not your business," Carl said, adding absurdly, "You're trespassing." Lizzie dropped the bag and flung open the door. A girl of about her own age was rolling on the floor, sweating so much that her face and arms looked as if they'd been dipped in water. Vomit splashed the rug and soaked the armchair she had tumbled out of. Lizzie took her mobile out of her coat pocket and dialed. "Ambulance," she shouted. 11 Falcon Mews, West 9. She knelt down beside the girl and told her it was all right, help was coming. They'd take her to hospital, St. Mary's probably. "What's your name?" "Sybil." It came out as a choked whisper. "I can hear the ambulance now." "Don't leave me," sobbed Sybil. "I have to let them in, but I'll be right back." Running down the stairs, Lizzie flung open the front door as the ambulance came howling round the mews. A man and a woman jumped out and ran across the cobbles carrying what looked like a stretcher. "Upstairs!" cried Lizzie. The paramedics laid Sybil on the stretcher. "You'll be okay now," Lizzie said. "You're safe." Nicola put a light on in the living room and saw something move in a dark corner. She nearly screamed, but controlled herself by clasping her hand over her mouth. She said, "What are you doing?" And then, when there was no answer, "What's going on?" "Why have you come here?" said Carl. "Carl? What's happened?" He was silent for so long she thought he wasn't going to speak to her. Then at last he said in a voice she barely recognised, "Sybil, they took her away." "What's happened to her?" "She took poison," he said. "Someone came to the house and found her and called an ambulance." "What do you mean?" "I've been in her flat. There's sick all over the place. She nearly died. She probably is dead now." "What poison?" said Nicola. "I don't know. It doesn't matter." "I'm going to look." "No, don't. Don't. It's not your business." But she was on the stairs. The big room where Sybil had sweated and struggled stank of vomit. Nicola covered her nose with a handful of tissues from her bag. "It was that same stuff you sold to Stacy, wasn't it?" "She got it herself, online," he muttered. No, Carl. You gave it to her. Let's go downstairs. I can't stand this smell." At the foot, she sat on the bottom stair. "Whatever she held over you, whatever Dermot did, I don't want to know. I'm frightened of you, Carl." "There's nothing to be frightened of. I'll tell you everything. I won't keep anything back." "You've killed her, haven't you? I never thought I would say that to anyone. It's the most terrible thing anyone can say." Her face was white and her hands shook. "I can't stay here with you." "Don't leave me," he said. "Please don't leave me." He took hold of her by the shoulders and pulled her to him. "Let me go, Carl," she said in her clear, resounding voice. "Let me go." She stepped out into the dark. Moaning softly, whimpering, he sat down on the front step and put his head in his hands. He knew he must, at any rate superficially, clean up that top flat, and went upstairs carrying a bucket with him. The smell in the room wasn't nearly as bad as Nicola had said. A slightly sour whiff, that was all. By midday the task was completed. The doorbell rang. It made him jump. Sybil's father stood outside. "I won't stop," Cliff Soames said. "Sybil's back with us now. The hospital sent her home this morning. I've come for her things." Was this how it felt when you knew you were going to faint? Carl clutched hold of the tabletop. Cliff came in, slamming the door behind him. "They got most of that stuff out of her. They said she'll be okay now, but she'll not be coming back here, not ever. Her mum's looking after her, won't let her out of her sight. She won't think of leaving us again." Cliff Soames' words sank in. Sybil wasn't coming back here. Sybil wasn't dead. He began to shake, his hands trembling, the muscles in his legs jumping. "Sybil wants to stay alive," said Cliff, his tone ominous. "You'll never set eyes on her again. Does she owe you any rent?" Carl didn't know what to say. The real sum she owed he was afraid to put into words. £80, he said, and stupidly, "if you can see your way." Cliff Soames pulled a wad of notes out of his pocket, handed them over, and said he'd like a receipt. "The rents you people charge. I've read about you in the papers, greedy, grasping buggers. I hope it chokes you." Carl wrote a receipt for £80 and handed it over in silence. His first task, he thought, would be to spend some of the money on a couple of bottles of wine, and perhaps a bottle of something stronger. The phone rang. It was a man called Harry, who said he was a friend of Nicola's and would like to come round in his jalopy and pick up her stuff. Now, if poss. Harry seemed unlike any possible friend of Nicola's. He wore a paint-stained tracksuit and had a big bushy beard, as well as shoulder-length hair. Carl tried to persuade Harry to take Nicola's green goose ornament with the rest of her things, but Harry had looked at it and shook his head. So there it sat on the hall table, a silent and reproachful reminder of everything that had happened to Carl over the past few months. "What would you do," said Adam Yates, "if you recognised someone you'd seen doing something weird, and you thought he might have committed a crime?" He and Lizzie were walking along the canal towpath between Cunningham Place and Lisson Green. It was a fine, clear evening. "What do you mean by weird?" said Lizzie. They sat on a seat on the bank. "The guy who used to do your job at the pet place, what was he called?" "Dermot McKinnon. He was murdered." "I know he was," said Adam. "It happened in a street called Jerome something, Jerome Crescent, I think. They never found who did it." He paused. "At approximately that time, I'm not exactly sure of the date, I was cycling along the path where we are now, and this guy was on the opposite bank with a big backpack. It was getting dark and he didn't see me." "What guy, Adam?" "The man whose house you took McKinnon's stuff to. He was standing at the door when I met you in the street that day. He's the man I saw with the backpack. I watched him from the bank through the trees. I know he didn't see me. He squatted down, undid the bag, and took a big, heavy thing out of it. Then I saw him throw the bag into the canal, but not the heavy object, which he sort of cradled in his arms. It was all very odd." "Oh, my God," said Lizzie. "I hadn't given it much thought until recently. At the time, I didn't know who he was. Certainly didn't know there was any connection between him and the man who was murdered. So it gave me quite a shock to recognise him. And he and Dermot McKinnon lived in the same house. It's an odd coincidence, don't you think? Are you going to go to the police?" "I don't know. What I'd like would be to talk to him about it," he said. "I'd like to know his state of mind. I think I'd tell him I don't intend to go to the police, but when I've heard him out, if he consents to speak to me, I'll tell him he should go to them himself." "What, and confess?" "That would be the general idea." "But people don't do that, Adam. Not voluntarily. And what happens if he gets violent? If you're right and he did kill Dermot, what's to stop him killing again?" All was well in Carl's life, except for the loss of Nicola. In the mornings and sometimes in the evenings he worked on his novel, mechanically, almost automatically, remembering Raymond Chandler's advice to authors that, when at a loss, they should have a man come into a room with a gun. Carl introduced scenes of violence in order to liven up his story. The phone rang. It was a man called Adam Yates that Carl had never heard of. "You met my girlfriend, Lizzie Milsom." Had he? "I won't keep you," said Adam Yates. "I just want to talk with you for a few minutes. I could come round about 8. At 10 to 8, Carl stationed himself at the window that looked onto the mews. On the dot, a man of about Carl's own age appeared at the other end of the mews. Carl went downstairs to answer the door, feeling sick for the first time in months. He opened the door, and the man he had seen from the window said, "Adam Yates." He was a little taller than Carl, his dark hair cut short, clean-shaven so closely as somehow to have an official look. He followed Carl into the living room. "This won't take long," Adam said. Carl, retreating into his old world of fear and dread, was longing for a drink. 2 bottles of wine stood on the table by the sofa. He told Adam to sit down. "What do you want to say to me?" "The event that I want to talk about happened last September," said Adam. "By the canal." Carl filled a glass from the Sauvignon bottle. It had never been so much needed or tasted so good. "I was on the canal bank," Adam Yates said. "I saw you come along, kneel down, and take a heavy object out of your backpack, which you then dropped into the canal. Of course I wondered why, but I didn't put it together with the murder of Dermot McKinnon. I didn't even hear about the murder until some time later. I didn't know you had any connection to Dermot until I came to Falcon Mews to meet Lizzie, and I saw you come out of your front door." Carl swallowed half the contents of the wine glass. "I wanted to tell you that I know what you've done," Adam said. Carl sat back, his mind clear suddenly. "Well, I'm not paying you blackmail money. I've had enough of that." "I'm not asking you to," said Adam. "What's the point of all this, then?" "I just wanted you to know that I know," Adam said. "What I'd really like is for you to go to the police and confess what you did. You'd not have any worries then. It would all be over. You'd go to prison, but confessing would shorten your sentence. For a moment, Carl felt an immense burden lift from his shoulders as he considered a life free from anxiety and fear. But then reality came crashing back. "Why should I?" he said. "Why the hell should I confess?" "Because I know," Adam said, "and you know that I know." He got up, turned, and looked at Carl. "I can see you're suffering, but there is a way to end this, and you know what that is." One fine day, Nicola came round. She told him she'd met someone else, was living with him. They were getting married soon. Nothing, of course, was said about Dermot or Sybil or Stacey, and nothing about money. Nicola left after half an hour. Carl watched her from the window, keeping his eyes on her until she had turned out of the mews into Sutherland Avenue. "He's a very serious young man," said Dot Milsom. "He acts more like a man twice his age." "Who does?" her husband Tom asked. "Lizzie's young man, Adam." "He's a cut above any boyfriend she's ever had." Tom Milsom looked up from his newspaper. "And at least he's got some manners." Tom turned to the crime pages and gave a low whistle. "What is it, Tom?" "Remember that chap who was hit over the head in Jerome Crescent? Well, it says here that someone's walked into a police station and confessed. Imagine doing that." "Oh, I'd be too scared," said Dot. Tom shook his head, more in sorrow than anger. "It might be a comfort," he said. "Think what it must have been like to have..."
Dark Corners by Ruth Rendell was read by Patricia Hodge, abridged by Robin Brooks and produced by Kirstine Cameron.